So how's the new Hyper Tough? And then the Makita there. And the Metabo. Compared to the rest of the cutoff tools found on the market, and can any of them beat the performance of the Dewalt? But first, let's take a look at cutting depth here. Now, this may be important to some, from the disc to the motor housing. So all the cutoff tools were tested and measured with brand new rigid cutoff discs. And here, when we look at that measurement, the Dewalt there is still the highest, coming in at almost 1 inch. And this is due to the drivetrain being offset from the motor. Very similar here to the Metabo. Now, dyno-wise, things are a little bit different here with my load cell and RPM sensor here, giving us that data out to the laptop. So direct drive from the sensor unit into a CNC motor, just your cheap motor off of Amazon. From there, I'm going to apply a load using the same DC load cells I've had for, well, years now, load testing batteries. Now the knockoff Bosch, which you'll find on Amazon under a whole bunch of different names, colors, it is quite close there in appearance, but performance-wise, yeah, it's pretty bad. If you want to see the failure video, I will leave the link below for this. So I loaded each tool down to 15,000 RPM, and here's the actual watts they were producing. Now, surprisingly here, the rigid actually came out on top. Now, yes, this was with the 12 amp hour battery, so the rigid here will even produce that power at a high RPM, which is, of course, critical to cutting applications. Now, some of you may have noticed that the Metabo is not listed here, and that's because when I went to dyno it, without even any load, it would just rotate the dyno at a slow RPM. So we'll see more of this when we do the actual practical cut tests. But for now, yeah, from the dyno data, we can't actually see that with this 12 volt Metabo. Maximum watts before the tool cut out. Well, the Dewalt here is just an absolute beast, producing over 1,000 watts with the 5 amp hour power stack. And even though it's a little absurd, but with the 12 amp hour on the rigid here, 810 watts. And you can see there's quite a big difference between running the 4 amp hour versus this 12 amp hour on the rigid. With the Hyper Tough coming in last here. So definitely not impressive at all. Let's take a look at how each of the tools do with different batteries. So the Hercules, yeah, it's 12 volts, not very impressive, especially with the 2 amp hour. If you are going to run this, I would say you definitely need to pick up the 4 amp hour. It makes a big difference. As you can see here, we're going up roughly 150 watts. And on a side note, it does come with a depth gauge, but it does not have a port for vacuum extraction of that dust. Power here, worst of the 18 volts. Yeah, it's cheap. Performance is downright horrible with that 1.5. And you're pretty much at the max power with the 5 amp hour, as you can see, quite similar to the 8. And I even threw the Milwaukee Forge on there, but I still could only get around 300 watts. Bosch, of course, yeah, it is 12 volts. So the numbers aren't the greatest here. You definitely want to be using either that 3 amp hour Dremel battery or the 6 amp hour here. With a Dewalt, just an absolute animal. From my testing, you definitely want to run either that 1.7 power stack or this 5 amp hour power stack. You can even push it a little bit higher if you're willing to run that 15 amp hour flex volt. Does come with the depth gauge and vacuum extraction. But the part about this that sucks is this proprietary connection point here. Now, one thing that is interesting to see here on the Dewalt, it gives us max watts out of 550. And if we look over here, that was tested with the DCB 203, which is the actual 2 amp hour battery. And when we compare that to the data here, the 2 amp hour averaged 535 watts. And these values were averages of 3 pulls on the dyno per battery. Just something that's quite interesting to see that, yes, what Dewalt is claiming, we actually achieved in those test results. Now, it's interesting with the Ryobi here, performance-wise, it was pretty level across the board. Now, there is a jump when you go from the 2 amp hour to that 3 amp hour and up. But then once you get to the 6, it leveled right out. So it didn't matter if you're running a 6 amp hour or the new 12 amp hour. There wasn't any performance gain there once you got above that. But as you can see, if you're running that older 3 amp hour with the 21700s, that's going to give you the most bang with the smallest footprint possible. Now the rigid, now you definitely want to stay away from the standard 2 amp hour. I found that interesting. I tested a couple of those and I was still averaging around 500 watts. Whereas when you went to that 2 amp hour max, it was around 600, similar to the 4 max, 6 max. We jumped up 100 watts going to the 8 amp hour and then about 70 jumping to this 12 amp hour. Definitely performance-wise, for the most bang for your buck, that's going to be this rigid. Milwaukee, what can I say? Performance-wise, yeah, it's 12 volt. Just horrible compared to a 20 volt tool. But the high output batteries there give it quite a boost, especially when we're talking this 5 amp hour. So when you compare it to the 6 amp hour, you know, around 341 watts. And then we go up to about 365. So there is some benefit to running the high output batteries. And it comes with a nice depth gauge here with a swivel vacuum port though. So definitely, in my opinion, the best one on the market for that. But Milwaukee needs to give us this in 18 volts. Hyper tough here. Worst performance of them all. Really bad. If you're running that 1.5 amp hour that comes with it, you almost gain 100 watts going to the 4 amp hour. What can I say? It's cheap. It has this weird head swivel feature. You know, that's quite interesting if you were to put actually a grinding disc on there. You know, so then you could use it like this. Definitely something interesting they did there. But overall, in my opinion, this wouldn't be something I'd be looking at. The new Makita. Performance is almost the same, no matter if you're running the 2 amp hour or the 6 amp hour. You only get a boost from the 2 to the 6 here of roughly 60 watts. Overall, it seems like a well thought out tool with forward reverse there, safety on the side, LED light on the bottom. Now it does come with a depth gauge with a dust collection port. Nothing all that fancy, but it's definitely nice to have if you're doing tile work. So cut time, 1/2 inch rebar. So some practical use here. You'll notice that the Metabo with the 2 amp hour was about mid of the pack. But when you use this 4 amp hour, it's right up there with the Milwaukee if it's running the 2.5 high output. But surprisingly, the Hercules here actually beats the Milwaukee when equipped with this 4 amp hour battery. But with the 2 amp hour, yeah, it's almost last there at 38 seconds. And speaking of last, again, you know, from what we've seen with the data from the Dyno, this hyper tough, not very good at all. Now for the 20 volts, the Dewalt, just an absolute hammer. And like I said, you can get a little bit more out of it If you put that 15 amp hour flex volt on there, and also the 15 amp hour flex volt, but right there running with it when equipped with this 12 amp hour is the rigid. And again, the performance does come down. If you're using the 4 amp hour, you're looking at 6 seconds versus 4, and your 6 and your 8 amp hours are going to be, you know, between that. And then the Makita, if you're running a 6 amp hour, right there comparable to the rigid with the 4. Hopefully we see better battery packs and we can get this performance up with this tool. Followed by the Ryobi. Again, not bad for the price, but the rigid is definitely the better buy. And the Bauer taking up the last 3 spots there with, yeah, horrible performance for a 20 volt tool. It acts just like a 12 volt. Here's some overall additional specs, model, where it's made. One thing to point out, the Bosch is actually made in Germany. Warranty, cost, now this is going to be tool only except for the Hyper Tough, which does come with that 1.5. Claimed RPM and tested unloaded max RPM. And if it has forward and reverse or just forward. Metabo, one thing to note with this though, is the anvil size here seems to not be the same standard as over here in America, because this disc will not sit on here perfectly, probably due to that steel reinforcement ring. Because here you're talking 0.388, and the disc is only 0.38, versus a disc that actually came with it of 0.395. Now I can hear already, what about the Metabo 18 volts? Well, it's really hard to get here in America. I've had it on order for about 2 months now. Again, it's just really hard to get here. It took me a couple months to get this 18 volt 10 amp hour so that we can actually start doing the high power drill test. And I did early on in a previous episode test the works, almost the same internal components. You know, only the real difference you're going to have there are the batteries, so it's roughly about the same tool if you're looking at that. Out of all the ones tested, these are the 4 I would recommend. Value play wise, this rigid though, it's pretty hard to beat with that small compact motor. Even look at it here next to Makita there. And this Dewalt, yeah, it's a little bit big. It's just an impressive tool. Yeah, some will say, you know, well, you could use an angle grinder. Well, yeah, in a lot of cases you can. I have both, but this is something that's easy to use one-handed. And then the Makita there, new on the market. I think they did a decent job. I just wish they could have done a little bit better. Yes, I think we could get a boost if they upgrade these battery packs. I do like this intake screen, which you can remove there and blow out. You know, that's something that's not found on the rest. Yes, some do have intake screens, but they're not easily removable for cleaning. So here you have it. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.